one parade, two senators, and a moment that rattled the room. When ambition confronted truth, there was only one that dominated. What actually transpired behind the headlines, and why does it matter more than ever now? Press play to dive in. It started as a parade, but it concluded with a country wondering who actually speaks on their behalf. Deep in the Capitol, where spotlights collide with silence, one senator held fast while another faltered in the face of realities he never thought he would encounter. But what if patriotism is no longer an emotion, but a battlefield? Can there still be unity where division was sown? It isn't a tale of politics. It's a tale of moments, of voices, and of one hearing that said more than anyone could have meant. Let's travel back to where it all started. The entire country held its collective breath. In a jaw-dropping Senate hearing, Senator John Nye Kennedy did something no one saw coming. Speaking in a smooth but forceful tone, he dropped bombshell evidence that shook the room and the nation. At the center of the storm, Representative Adam Schiff. What appeared to be a mundane leaked email was the skeleton key that opened an elaborate and well-concealed political plot. And poof, Schiff, once considered brash and impregnable in politics, was facing stiff public scrutiny, his reputation teetering on the edge. In an instant, the world had changed. Schiff was no longer at the forefront. He was stuck in the middle of a political earthquake. But first, let's get into the whole story. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. The hearing was held in the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room, where the tall windows admitted just enough light to make the dark wood table shine. It was hushed, tight. You could practically hear individuals holding their breath. Then, a crisp crack of the gavel from Chairman Senator Jack Reed broke the silence. The session had commenced. Adam Schiff rose, every inch the veteran lawyer. His suit was immaculate, impeccably tailored. But if you inspected closely, his hands shook a little as he set down a bulky pile of papers at the podium. He surveyed the room with piercing eyes, determined to seize the moment. "Dear colleagues," he began, his voice calm but pointed, "we're here to confront a troubling reality. President Trump has hijacked the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary parade for his own personal agenda." He paused for effect, his words hanging in the air. "This isn't a tribute to our military. It's a $45 million publicity stunt," he said, his voice rising slightly. Some Democratic senators nodded their heads in agreement, particularly Richard Blumenthal, who sat directly behind him, observing approvingly. Reporters made notes, others murmured, and a few cameras closed in. Schiff waved the pile of papers in his hand. Every page was carefully flagged and labeled. "This," he explained, "is evidence." The White House intervened directly in planning the parade. There's a directive here from the president himself requesting Trump's name be inserted into the military's formal speech. This wasn't a celebration. It was propaganda. One MSNBC reporter leaned forward, nodding while their camera remained glued to Schiff, but others did not move. Across the room, Senator John Kennedy remained seated, hands folded, face expressionless, but a tiny, knowing smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Schiff went on, his voice more acidic now. "And do not forget the timing. While Israel and Iran move closer to war, our president distracts the country with a flashy display of military might. Rather than pursuing diplomacy, he produces a show to pump up his own image." He gestured around the room, getting the crowd going. "And don't even get me started on his policies here at home. While real issues like the border crisis fester, he uses our military not to protect us, but to threaten our own citizens, like we've seen in the ICE raids in Los Angeles, Chicago." The moment Schiff's speech ended, the reactions started trickling in. A handful of people applauded, briefly, and most of them already opposed to Trump. But the room remained generally silent, thick with tension, as everyone waited to see how the Republicans would react. Senator Richard Blumenthal rose to speak and add his voice. "Senator Schiff is correct," he declared. "Spending $45 million for this event cannot be defended, not when our nation has such grave security issues." But not all were prepared to leap in. Across the way, Senator John Fetterman sat quietly, his eyes darting toward Senator Kennedy, as if considering something serious. That fleeting moment appeared to catch Schiff by surprise, but only momentarily. He recovered quickly and moved on. His tone grew more agitated now. "I'm asking that this committee investigate the documents I've presented. We have to know if the president abused his authority, making what could have been a military victory celebration into a political show." He put a hand on his chest, a move that appeared to emphasize his good faith. Yet his eyes conveyed otherwise. They flashed over toward the cameras momentarily, as if confirming the shot would air tonight. The air inside the room became heavy. Some Democratic senators nodded once more, but the Republicans, led by Kennedy, remained calm and expressionless. Lindsey Graham, who sat close by, leaned forward and whispered something in Kennedy's ear. Kennedy nodded barely perceptibly. In the press gallery, a ground news journalist frantically scribbled down words, feeling that Schiff was playing a daring card. But it was dangerous. If his papers failed to stand up, he could have just undermined his cause. Struggling to maintain the momentum, Schiff broadened the horizon. He addressed foreign affairs. "We can't help but notice how President Trump is shirking responsibility in the Israel-Iran crisis," he said. His most recent social media update claims the U.S. isn't party to Iran's aggression. But how credible is that, particularly when Iran creeps closer to nuclear arms? He took a pause, his eyes locking with Kennedy's in the room, nearly as if issuing a silent challenge. "And when it comes to immigration," Schiff continued, "leaders such as Karen Bass and Brandon Johnson have spoken out. ICE raids aren't only attacking unauthorized workers. They're instilling fear and damaging our economy. President Trump claims he's defending us, but in actuality, he's tearing us apart." As Schiff finally took his seat, the room buzzed with subdued mutterings. Some applauded, but there was no thundering applause. Back in the rear row, Trump fan shook her head and leaned forward. "Schiff's grandstanding again," she said. Up front, an MSNBC correspondent pounded out a rapid message, readying the lead. "Schiff accuses Trump of abusing power with military parade." The ground news reporter, however, remained reserved, pointing out Schiff's speech contained no hard evidence. Across the hearing table, Schiff's face appeared tranquil, but his fingers betrayed him, twisting the corner of his notes gently as if attempting to steady himself. Then, bang! Chairman Jack Reed rapped the gavel once more, cutting through the hum in the room. All eyes turned to Senator John Kennedy, who now stood up from his chair. Lean and tall, his figure stretched long shadows across the gleaming table. In his signature Southern drawl, he started, "Gentlemen, ladies," he drawled, elongating each word with a combination of charm and intent. "I have heard a lot of tall tales in my time, but what my friend from California just said takes the cake." Senator Kennedy spoke with a chuckle in his voice and a lean forward, addressing Schiff directly. "Senator Schiff is trying to get y'all to think that this military parade, a salute to 250 years of Army service, is nothing but President Trump boasting," he said with a slow headshake. "Well, sorry, but he's fishing in a dry pond." A wave of laughter traveled through the room, particularly on the Republican side. Lindsey Graham smiled and nodded. Even some folks in the back, previously silent, broke into little smiles. Then, with a touch of drama, Kennedy raised a single sheet of paper and waved it around like it was some precious prize. "Here," he declared, "is one of the so-called documents Senator Schiff says establishes the president interfered in the parade." He paused, raising his eyebrows, then dropped the punchline. "But let me tell y'all, this paper is as thin as a spiderweb in a hurricane." The room erupted once more. Laughter filled the room, and Schiff's jaw clenched as he wrote wildly in his notebook, eyes hard and cold. But Kennedy wasn't finished. His voice changed, softer and more emotional as he addressed the people. "This parade," he said, "wasn't about celebrating one man. It was about celebrating the brave men and women who stood at Valley Forge, stormed the beaches of Normandy, defended our freedom in Fallujah." He motioned toward the screen at his back, where footage started rolling, families holding flags, veterans saluting, a small girl presenting a bouquet of flowers to a fully uniformed soldier. Posts from everyday Americans covered the screen. Pictures of grandparents in uniform, messages thanking the Army for 250 years of service. "Senator Schiff calls it a political stunt," Kennedy declared, his voice calm. "I call it gratitude." The room stirred. Some nodded. A few whispered quietly, the atmosphere shifting again. Then came a surprise no one expected. Senator John Fetterman, the tall, broad-shouldered Democrat from Pennsylvania, stood up. His hoodie peeked out beneath his suit jacket, a stark contrast to the polished look of his colleagues. But when he spoke, his voice was low and serious. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak," he said. The room went utterly silent. Everyone stared at him. Schiff's head jerked up, alarm dashing across his face. "I don't always disagree with my colleague," Fetterman started, looking over at Kennedy. "But he's correct in this one thing. This parade was about recognizing our soldiers, not politics." He paused and allowed it to sink in. "I put it on about the parade because I think we should acknowledge those who've sacrificed everything for this nation. That's something we should all get behind. Democrat, Republican, it's irrelevant." You heard only the scratching of reporters' pens. Fetterman's words had struck hard, crossed party lines like a gusty wind. Even Senator Blumenthal shifted uneasily in his seat. Schiff remained stuck, his pen suspended in midair. Kennedy didn't miss a beat. "I have respect for a man who expresses himself," he declared, tipping his head toward Fetterman. "Even if his party's in charge." Fetterman smiled fleetingly. Schiff's face grew stern. Taking advantage of the moment, Kennedy brought in his first witness. "Retired General Thomas Hargrove," he stated, 40 years in the U.S. Army." The general moved up, dignified and tall. Medals shone on his chest, and his stride was steady with unspoken strength. "The parade," he started in a low, firm tone, "was organized wholly by the Department of Defense. It was intended to celebrate the Army's heritage, period." "I was at those planning sessions," he went on. "Never was there a request from the White House for the inclusion of the president's name or political platform. Was centered around the soldiers, straightforward and simple." General Hargrove's words rang through the room. He spoke delicately of how the parade was organized, explaining that it was arranged by seasoned military officers, not politicians. The only reference made to President Trump, he said, was when the soldiers broke into Happy Birthday during a lighter moment. "A spontaneous act," Hargrove concluded with a slight smile, "not an order." That brought a few laughter moments from around the room. Senator Kennedy leaned back, letting the general's words settle. Then he leaned forward again, feigning a hint of surprise. "So, General, you're telling us this was really about honoring the Army, not some political stunt?" Hargrove nodded firmly. "Correct, Senator. Anyone saying otherwise is distorting the truth." This time, there was applause in the room, loudest from the Republicans, but even some of the undecided joined in. Schiff, a stone face at the table, didn't applaud. His fingers drummed rapidly on the wood, and he leaned forward to whisper something to his aide. But Kennedy wasn't finished yet. He turned toward Schiff and said, "My colleague wants to drag in the Middle East and immigration, like he's tossing mud and hoping something sticks." There were a few murmurs. Kennedy kept going. Let's talk about the Middle East. President Trump has been clear. The United States isn't involved in Iran's recent attacks, but if push comes to shove, we're ready to defend our interests. That's leadership, not distraction. He raised his phone, holding up one of Trump's most recent posts. The screen flickered to life, eliciting a few raised eyebrows and furtive nods from the audience. And immigration? Kennedy went on. Senator Schiff decries ICE raids, but loses sight of Democratic mayors such as Karen Bass and Brandon Johnson who are out there protecting rule breakers. We don't require emotional speeches. We require border security. And then he dropped the line that hit hardest. Dear colleagues, the truth is straightforward. This parade was about the pride of America, but Schiff is trying to turn it into a scandal because he can't bear to see people unifying for something greater than politics. He hesitated, slowly taking a seat as applause erupted throughout the room. Schiff paled. He slouched over and spoke rapidly in a whisper to his aide, scanning through his notes as though desperately grabbing for a retort. But Kennedy simply sat quietly, gaze fixed forward like a chess grandmaster who'd just made the winning move. Chairman Jack Reed, attempting to calm the room, tapped his gavel gently. We'll now proceed with matters concerning foreign policy, he said, his voice even but his expression clearly curious to see how Schiff would respond. Then another Republican rose. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina stood tall, his voice fired up and his presence commanding. His sharp gray suit stood in contrast to the fire in his delivery. Mr. Chairman, he said, I'd like to clear something up. He looked around the room, then fixed Schiff with a stare. Our California colleague just attempted to use a parade as an excuse to blame President Trump, and now he's bringing in the Middle East. Graham's voice rose a notch, more like a candidate at a rally than a member of a committee hearing. Let's deal with facts. President Trump is showing strength and clarity when it comes to Israel and Iran. That's not a distraction. It's real leadership. He lifted his phone, displaying a new Trump post. The president's made it clear. We're not involved in these attacks, but if Iran touches us, they'll face a response like nothing they've seen. That's peace through strength. Each word landed heavily, his voice unwavering. And as for Israel, he continued, we must stand with our ally. Iran is inching its way towards nuclear capabilities. If we don't do something about it right now, the whole world will suffer. He paused, his voice stern but resolute. I urge the president to stand with, end of chunk, Israel if necessary by all means, from arms supplies to complete military coordination. The room buzzed. Applause came quickly from Trump supporters, while others sat stiffly, some shaking their heads in concern. Schiff, sensing the moment slipping away, suddenly stood, cutting Graham off before he could return to his seat. My colleague from South Carolina, Schiff said, voice sharp as a blade, talks a big game about leadership, but what we're seeing here is a president dodging responsibility. He gestured toward Graham's phone with disdain. That tweet he just quoted? It's just another bunch of hollow words. President Trump says we're not involved in the recent conflict in Iran. But how can we believe a man who throws parades for the sake of his own ego while the Middle East moves us toward war? The room came alive again. Schiff's voice dropped, as if sharing a secret with the crowd. And let's talk about Iran. The president tore up the nuclear agreement. He backed Iran into a corner. What we're seeing now, this rise in aggression, this tension, it's the direct result of Trump's reckless approach and total lack of strategy. A few in the crowd nodded. Journalists wrote furious scribbles. One MSNBC reporter paused, intently captivated. The ground news correspondent again recorded the absence of specific evidence, but couldn't help but note the growing momentum in Schiff's voice. In the back of the room, Kennedy remained silent, but shared a subtle nod with Graham, preparing his next move. But before Kennedy could leap in, Senator Rand Paul rose. The Kentucky Republican had a different flame burning in his eyes, one more measured, more questioning. Mr. Chairman, he continued, voice calm and smooth, I must say something on this. Every head turned. I concur Iran is a threat, but let's be absolutely clear. Calling for war, as my friend from South Carolina just did, is a risky course. We walked there before, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and we paid with blood, not triumph. He glared at Graham, eyes narrowed in challenge. To support Israel does not mean sending our children into another perpetual war. The room shifted once more. Even some Democrats nodded silently in agreement. And while we're talking about costs, Paul added, his voice rising slightly, that parade cost $45 million, money that could have protected American interests. Instead, it funded a spectacle. Kennedy finally rose again, his voice deep and commanding, refusing to let Paul's critique linger in the air. My colleague from Kentucky, I respect your viewpoint, but we've got to see the bigger picture here. He looked across the room, his eyes sweeping over the committee. President Trump is not asking for war. He's asking for diplomacy. His tweet clarifies that. The U.S. is willing to negotiate to end the Israel-Iran conflict. That's not reckless. That's strength with restraint. Then Kennedy shifted his attention back to Schiff, and the tone of his voice turned sharp. Our friend from California would have us think the president is responsible for all the instability. But let's be real. Who's actually causing a ruckus? Individuals like Schiff, who are more interested in discrediting the president than cooperating towards actual solutions. To buttress his argument, Kennedy summoned a new witness, Colonel Michael Carter, a war-decorated military strategist and past Pentagon advisor. Carter, in a crisp civilian suit, walked up to the podium confidently. Senator Kennedy, he started, President Trump's Middle East policy, beyond the din, has always put diplomacy first. His tone was unruffled, but infused with the weight of experience. We have confirmed records where the White House has been working behind the scenes to get Israel and other key regional players into back-channel negotiations. That post everyone's discussing? That wasn't bluffing. It was part of a larger policy of discouraging escalation without confronting it head-on. He flipped and displayed a chart where there was a significant drop in regional attacks in recent months. There was a silence, then a soft tidal wave of whispers from the room. Some senators looked at each other. Even some skeptics leaned forward, clearly taken aback. But Schiff wasn't yet willing to give up. He leapt to his feet once more, tone laced with exasperation. Those stats don't tell the entire tale, he retorted. Trump can claim diplomacy, but actions, staging, end of chunk. Parades, Iran threats, these fan the flames. Schiff's voice was sharp with alarm, but before he could continue to push, Kennedy calmly held up a hand, pausing him as a schoolteacher might a misbehaving pupil. My friend, Kennedy replied calmly, you're not explaining, you're obscuring. That parade was not a war drum. It was a salute to American warriors. And the Middle East? President Trump is doing what you refuse to do, standing up for our friends and protecting American interests. Schiff's eyes narrowed. His brow was furrowed in tension. He swept his gaze about the room, hoping for signals of support, but many of his colleagues would not meet his eye. Chairman Jack Reed, always the calm hand, rapped his gavel with deliberate poise. We will proceed to discuss immigration, he declared, voice steady but eyes flashing interest. A matter raised earlier by Senator Schiff. John Nye Kennedy, still sitting at ease, nodded discreetly to Lindsey Graham, a mutual understanding as if choreographed backstage. And John Fetterman, meanwhile, remained silent, his initial interruption now being replaced by a quiet, anguished gaze. He walked into the Democratic unity, and he knew it. But Schiff wasn't finished yet. He leapt to his feet, his voice rising again to the razor's edge of an experienced prosecutor. Dear colleagues, he started out, fists tightly closed to hide his increasing agitation. President Trump not only politicized a military celebration, he's using fear by weaponizing ICE raids. He produced a letter and continued to read. Mayor Karen Bass writes, These raids disrupt the lives of hardworking people contributing to our communities. This isn't border security, it's oppression." He glanced about, hoping for a wave of applause. Scattered claps alone came, his most dedicated supporters. The others were not swayed. Kennedy took his chance. "Let me ask you this," he began slowly, his voice low and compelling. "What do Americans fear most? Law enforcement enforcing the law? Or violent gangs protected by mayors like Karen Bass and Brandon Johnson?" A moment. Silence gathered. "ICE ain't the bad guys," he went on. "They're doing what Congress told them to do, securing our borders and safeguarding our neighborhoods. If Senator Schiff is going to weep over lawbreakers, he should take a look at the numbers." He raised a Department of Homeland Security chart. Thousands of crimes associated with illegal immigration this year alone. The room churned, murmurs shifting positions. Schiff's voice intervened, blacker now, more desperate. "Those statistics don't paint the true picture," he retorted. "The individuals ICE targets, are they not essential workers? Farmers, hotel workers. Trump is destroying local economies simply for political gain." But Kennedy did not bat an eyelash. "My friend," he said suavely, "if you think paying below-the-table salaries to illegal workers is what's keeping this economy afloat, then you're on another planet. Americans are entitled to decent jobs, not border chaos." A wave of applause erupted, this time louder, even spilling into the press row. Schiff blinked hard, his jaw tightening. To drive his message home, Kennedy turned to the witness chair. "I'd like to call Sarah Mitchell, Senior ICE Field Director, 15 years of service to this country." Mitchell approached the podium, every inch the professional, navy blue suit, hair neatly tied, eyes sharp. "Senator Kennedy," she started, her tone measured. "ICE's mission is to enforce legislation passed by this same Congress. We don't raid indiscriminately. We focus on people with serious criminal histories, smugglers, violent criminals, habitual lawbreakers." She raised a tablet, tapping to a report. 70% of the immigrants we deported last year had criminal records, she said. "We have information that crime rates in particular areas have declined after these enforcement efforts." She turned back to the committee. "President Trump directed us to focus on public safety, and that's exactly what we're doing." Some senators nodded. Even a few Democrats looked pensive. The ground news reporter typed carefully. No spin, just facts. Schiff sat back, rattled. Kennedy leaned into his chair, a quiet smile forming as if he'd just delivered the checkmate move. Something to say. John Fetterman rose once more, his presence looming like a shadow over the room. His voice was steady, gravelly, neither aligned with Schiff nor fully in Kennedy's camp. "Mr. Chairman," he began, locking eyes with Schiff, then Kennedy, "I've seen the emails." A collective inhale swept the chamber. Even the reporters stopped typing. "I couldn't believe it," Fetterman went on. "But I double-checked the metadata with my staff this morning. They're authentic. And while I don't always see eye to eye with Senator Kennedy, this," he waved at the screen, "cuts it too close." Schiff went pale. Slowly, he leaned back, lips clenched, as if he were swallowing his response. Fetterman breathed in, then dropped the knockout punch. "I didn't come here to defend Trump. But I won't sit idly by as anyone takes a moment intended to salute our troops and makes it political theater. We should all be embarrassed it's gotten this far." The room hung in silence, tense with electricity. The ground news reporter's headline wrote itself, "Fetterman affirms bombshell email leak, Schiff's credibility collapses." Kennedy, taking the moment, marched with purpose. "Thank you, Senator Fetterman," he replied respectfully. Then, changing his tone to the balance of the chamber, "My colleagues, you just heard it. Verified, not spin, not projection, the truth." He pointed toward Schiff, whose shaky hands held his notes but could not locate the words. The American people are watching. They're weary of selective outrage, weary of politics masquerading as patriotism. President Trump isn't perfect, but in honor of our soldiers, he appeared. Schiff attempted to spin that. Chairman Jack Reed, visibly agitated but holding to decorum, struck the gavel with slightly more emphasis this time. "We will recess for a 15-minute recess," he declared, his words brusque but controlled. The room burst open, not into yelling, but into a whirl of murmurs, reporters fleeing with calls to editors, phones ringing with buzzers. Here was Schiff, still sitting looking down. The MSNBC reporter who had earlier bowed their head now slipped out a side door quietly. Kennedy shut his folder slowly, stuffed it into his briefcase, and rose. He shared a silent nod with Lindsey Graham. Fetterman stood as well, his face a mask, but his words etched into the day's history. As the senators streamed out, a Fox News chyron flashed to life on a screen in the hallway. Schiff exposed, email leak sparks media collusion scandal. Senate erupts. And just below that, Fetterman breaks ranks, calls out his own party. The fight was far from finished, but Kennedy had delivered the blow no one expected. As the Senate Armed Services Committee chamber cleared, the halls outside crackled with energy. Camera crews rushed to corral leaving senators as social media went wild with hashtags such as "Why Kennedy crushes," "Schiff," "Why Fetterman speaks," "Truth," "Parade not politics." Aides in the room rewired it. Outside, the country was already dividing. CNN delayed, MSNBC rushed, but ground news broke first, uncolored and sharp. Kennedy, Fetterman flipped narrative, parade not political, Schiff under fire for media coordination. At a coffee shop near Capitol Hill, a gray-haired veteran named Charles rewound the clip on his phone, observing as Kennedy displayed the photo of the saluting soldier. "This," Charles breathed to the empty air, "is what they tried to bury." Inside the Capitol, meanwhile, the hearing continued. Chairman Jack Reed's voice was stronger now. "Let us get back to the subject of this morning's hearing: defense appropriations and military readiness. The floor asks Senator Kennedy to close on the parade issue." Kennedy slowly rose. There was no firebrand today. He spoke like a statesman. "My friends, left, right, and center, we all disagree. That's the soul of democracy. But when our troops march, when our flag waves, when an old man salutes on his porch, that's not red or blue. That's America." A silence. "And when someone attempts to manipulate that into political spectacle, we have a responsibility, not to muffle them, but to meet them with truth." He scanned the room. "I call on this committee. Let us not worry about political optics, but about paying tribute to service, bettering policy, and bringing peace." Some Democrats even nodded. Chairman Reed rapped the gavel gently this time. "Let the record reflect the issue is settled. We move on now to classified briefings." Outside, reporters besieged Schiff, whose voice was hardly above a whisper under the explosion of microphones. "No, I didn't coordinate with anybody. These allegations are being taken out of context." Nobody was paying attention. Kennedy and Fetterman strolled alongside each other down the hall, two unlikely foes brought together by an instant of transcendent partisanship. "You punched hard," Fetterman grumbled. "You punched more accurately," Kennedy said. Later that evening on Truth Social, Trump's tweet pinned at the top was, "Parade wasn't about me. It was about America. But the left can't stand seeing unity unless they control it. Proud of Kennedy, respect for Fetterman." Comments poured in. Schiff got exposed. Fetterman surprised us all. We need more hearings like this. Last shots of the night. A young Marine viewing a YouTube video of Kennedy's speech in his barracks. Emily Chen on a live stream stating, "Journalism should report truth, not script narratives." Schiff, by himself in his office, looking at a dimmed screen playing his tirade in slow motion. The sound of Kennedy's voice soft in the background. The American people aren't fools. With the sun slipping below the Capitol dome, its dying light stretched out long shadows, shadows that could not conceal the seismic realignment occurring in Washington. Senator John Nye Kennedy, now the name on everyone's lips, stood on the Capitol steps beneath that amber sky, his silhouette cutting an iconic figure. Veterans approached one by one, young and old, to shake his hand, thank him, and take selfies. One whispered, "You said what we've been yelling at our TVs for years." While Adam Schiff waited in his dark Senate office, blinds drawn, as the hearing clips replayed on every channel, except MSNBC, which continued to tiptoe around the fallout. His aides didn't meet his eye. The self-assured man once was now a man who'd gazed into the storm and emerged worse for it. On social media, the culture war burned. There was a viral TikTok that cut together Kennedy's statement, "The American people aren't fools," with chants and parade imagery. Caption, "Finally, someone said it." The hashtag #Kennedy Storm hit the #1 trend on X, formerly Twitter. Another tweet went viral. Fetterman and Kennedy proved that honesty can penetrate noise again. Schiff's mask just slipped. Even centrist Democrats started retweeting Fetterman's tweet, enjoying his bipartisan honesty. "I didn't show up to play games. I showed up to respect soldiers and repair broken laws." But in liberal enclaves and private Discord servers, the pushback simmered. Democratic aides were leaked whispering about censure possibilities against Fetterman for eroding party cohesion. But the public wasn't hearing parties. They were viewing clips, reading unfiltered transcripts, and making up their own minds. Behind the cable news desks, panic and retooling ensued. Fox News led with, "Kennedy cracks the code, Dems implode over parade smear." CNN discussed Fetterman's risky action in a segment called Honesty or Betrayal. MSNBC, under pressure from backlash, finally broadcast a lackluster roundtable, most of the guests were clearly uneasy, called Parsing Parade Narratives. An Ohio middle-aged woman, observing it all from her kitchen, commented, "I don't trust Schiff anymore. But that Kennedy fellow? He's like when politics made sense." At the Capitol, meanwhile, Kennedy strolled slowly back through the deserted halls, his aide breathing softly behind him. "Sir, Ground News has just released a poll. Your approval rating among independents just climbed 17% in 2 days." He didn't answer. Rather, he stopped before a portrait of George Washington. "Amusing," he muttered. "Used to be they said truth rides a slow horse. Today, it rode a parade." Later that night, Schiff issued a short video statement, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. "Let me be clear. I never meant to politicize the parade. The emails shown were taken out of context. I stand by my record and my commitment to truth." But responses below spoke louder. "Damage control. Too late. Kennedy lives rent-free in your head now. We watched the hearing, Adam. Don't gaslight us." Meanwhile, Kennedy released a short Truth Social statement, plain and chilling. "You don't dishonor the Army and call it democracy. Not on my watch." It was liked 3.2 million times in an hour. While the city slept, one last post reflected the mood of the nation. It was an image, raw and powerful, of a little boy saluting in front of his father's uniform hanging on the wall, captioned, "Thanks to Kennedy and Fetterman, that salute meant something again today." As Senator Kennedy emerged from the Capitol, his tie a little crooked, but his grin unmistakably triumphant, the crowd cheered. Supporters filled the steps, taking pictures and shouting, "Canned awesome!" Meanwhile, Adam Schiff slipped anonymously out a side door. No cameras, no crowd, no words. Only silence. This wasn't just a political hearing, it was a reckoning. The U.S. Army 250th Anniversary Parade began as a national celebration. Schiff attempted to label it as a vanity stunt, but Americans resisted. Social media swamped with tales of sacrifice, World War II heroes and young soldiers who had fallen in Afghanistan. A single post stood out. A mother who grieved wrote, "This parade reminds me that my son didn't die in vain. Thank you, President Trump and Senator Kennedy, for keeping patriotism alive." It became viral, millions of likes, tens of thousands of shares. Schiff had flamed out, not only in the room, but in the people's hearts. What made this stand out? It wasn't the incisive questioning or the viral emails. It was that Kennedy, with surprising backing from Senator John Fetterman, crossed party lines. Fetterman's statement, "Fix the laws, not fight each other," echoed loudly, even amidst the mayhem. A reply to one of the posts put it in a nutshell. Schiff attempted to polarize. Kennedy and Fetterman reminded us the Army is the property of all Americans. Kennedy greeting veterans. Tweets and TikToks, "That's why I believe Kennedy." Ground news headlines, "Patriotism prevails. Kennedy converts hearing into national moment." MSNBC's begrudging coverage, overpowered by Truth Social and alternative media. A saluting veteran. A mother cradling her son's folded flag, a nation watching. When Kennedy stepped into his waiting automobile, an aide inquired, "Senator, what was the most significant thing today?" Kennedy paused, gazing back at the Capitol that shone in the fading sunlight, and spoke softly. "We reminded people that America is larger than any single person, and that's worth fighting for." This isn't a tale of Schiff or Kennedy alone. It's a tale of what kind of nation we wish to become. In America today, where political posturing too often supplants fact, today's hearing was a reminder that patriotism, selflessness, and unity are still important. So the next time the media spins or the headlines shriek, stop, check, think, just like Kennedy did, just like Fetterman courageously did. Subscribe to this channel if you value truth above spin. Turn on alerts. We're not finished yet. In our next video, we'll explore the next decisive pivot point and expose the way political narratives are made in the moment. Until then, stay up to date, stay realistic, and stay together.